Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Tait Talks podcast. I am your host, Tait Middleton. Today, actually, I should probably do a little intro of how we met. Currently, I am in Thailand, in Phuket, training at the world-famous Tiger Muay Thai, trying to become less fat. And I have stumbled across this gentleman today that I'm going to interview in Tom Kaemmerer-Farag. Did I get it right?
Nailed it.
Yes. How are you today, mate?
Yeah, good, thanks. You?
Pretty good. Thank you so much for coming into my creepy little room for us to do this podcast today.
That's a good setup. I'm used to the dodgy places around here now.
Yes. You've been here in Thailand for how many weeks?
I guess 2.5-ish.
Yeah. And you've done a bit of martial arts and stuff back home in London, England, haven't you?
Yeah. Kind of on and off at like a mix of martial arts kind of throughout my life. So when I was a kid, I was doing loads of stuff, just karate with like my dad and my brother were signed up to this same club as well.
Yeah.
And then I stopped for years because we basically run out of money.
Okay, yeah.
And then I got a bit fat and lazy, and then I was always quite nerdy about it and into it, but didn't really do much with it. And then I just got back into a little bit of like boxing and kickboxing for fitness with my heavy bag at home.
Yeah.
And then started to run away with it again with a bunch of different styles.
Yeah. So what were your ages when you first started doing karate?
When I did karate, I was probably 7-ish, something like that.
So you're a wonder boy.
Yeah, not quite. I'm not very good at it anymore.
So you're a wonder boy. You're a current day wonder boy. Yeah. And then you got into other martial arts and stuff like that.
Yeah. So actually practicing some, and then also just dorking out on a bunch of others as well.
So you said you're a nerd about it. So
Yes.
you like to go back and look at the lineage and all that type of stuff of fighting and martial arts.
One of the things I really like about the whole martial arts scene is, especially the more traditional stuff, there's a lot of like culture and like history to it, some of the older arts, which is just interesting in general. And then equally the kind of different cultures that are around, even the modern ones have their own kind of attitude and gym cultures and things like that, which are always good fun. It's just interesting to see kind of cross references between the different styles and kind of where they come from and how they work. But how does one style compare to another? Not necessarily against each other, but how do they work together? How are they different? Things like that. And then it's just it's my dorky hobby, that.
Yeah. So you do, and I always stuff up the pronunciation of this. Your main one, which is Wing Chun?
Nailed it.
Is it?
Yeah, Wing Chun's probably my favourite one.
Yeah.
And it's one that I practice. I've been doing Wing Chun about 6 years now, I think.
Yeah.
Training pretty, informally. It's one that it's not very popular with a lot of the combat sports types, who I also train with. Yeah. But I think it's got a lot more value than they give it. But equally, I think the whole traditional martial arts community has its own issues with it, and Wing Chun gets a bit of a bad rep generally. There's a lot of bad Wing Chun videos out on the internet.
Yeah. Can you give us a quick detail of actually what it is and where it's from?
Yeah. So it's Chinese martial arts. So it's from so Wing Chun's one of the ones where it's surrounded a bit with a lot of different stories about its lineage. The generally accepted is that it comes from the Southern Shaolin Temple, which there is apparently some dispute as to whether that actually even ever existed. But there was a nun, like a warrior nun there, like Shaolin monks they have at the temple. There was this warrior nun type called, I'm never sure if I'm actually nailing this name.
Well, no one's going to know, so just
Who
go
knows?
nuts. Yeah.
Nung Moi or something. NGMUI would be the English version. Yeah. But she basically, they fled the temple and she taught it to, and this is where it starts to deviate, either some princess that was forced to marry an emperor or just some random chick that basically called Yin Wing Chun, which is what she named the style after. And then it evolved from there. But really it came into its kind of main style from Hong Kong in kind of the 60s, I think, thereabouts. So it was kind of its big thing with Yip Man, who they made the movies about with Donnie Yen. Terrible movies.
As you were saying the other night at dinner, he famously fought Mike Tyson.
Yep, he does fight Mike Tyson in that.
Yeah.
And then from there it kind of sprung all over the world, and it became a lot more popular with Bruce Lee. So Bruce Lee initially practiced Wing Chun under Yip Man for a couple of years. Then he went to the States, blew up, became famous, and that's where Wing Chun really got its resurgence and spread into the kind of the West.
Yeah.
And essentially what it is, I realise I've just skated over that part of the question, is it's kind of like, it's like close quarters Kung Fu, basically. So it's very much, it's like a striking system. There's not really grappling to it.
Yep.
Any joint locks and things are done as like strikes rather than control.
Yep.
And it's a relatively simple system, but there's quite a lot of depth to it. So it relies on sensitivity and like physical connection. That sounds very like spiritual.
When bashing someone?
Yeah. So it's
I'm
about...
cry when I murder this guy.
Yeah. Less so the emotional side. I mean, physical sensitivity. So like when you're in contact with someone, if someone throws a punch, it's having the sensitivity to feel kind of where the pressure's going, send it off a different way, and kind of what the strikes almost occur naturally when you train it. But the problem is it's quite hard to train that sensitivity.
Smack you.
Yeah, kind of. And you have to be fed the right energies, and your body has to be able to feel before you register what's happening. Your body has to be trained to respond in a certain way to certain pressures, which is where it gets quite complex, and which is where it tends to kind of fall down a bit. But essentially it's like a close quarters striking system, but it doesn't look much like traditional boxing or Muay Thai or things that people are more familiar with. The strikes are very different. And it's all open hands, obviously, because it's a self-defense style rather than like a sport fighting system.
Now that leads me into pretty much how we got chatting. Well, I mean, we were chatting before, but how this podcast came about episode. You teach a self-defense class in London.
I did before I went traveling.
Before you went traveling. Obviously, as you just said, you've got a background in multiple martial arts, and you've tried many, and you're, as you said in your own words, you're a nerd about it, and you look into everything and stuff. So what I wanted to know is, and you've expressed this, so it's more what you've said, but the difference between self-defense versus like martial arts. As you said the other day, that a lot of I suppose martial artists and stuff, whether it's boxing, Muay Thai, blah blah blah, will also always advertise it as self-defense, whereas what you're doing is actually a bit different. Like, so what are you teaching? Your self-defense? What?
So that's a big, not necessarily bugbear, but yeah, you're right. And it's not just martial artists. It's kind of everyone perceives, I do martial arts, so now I know self-defense. I know how to defend myself. Whereas the reality of it is, you know how to fight. Maybe, and you know that style, and maybe you can throw a really hard punch, a really hard kick, or whatever, but that's not necessarily the same as self-defense. And that's one of the things that I really like to separate between the two, because like with martial arts, I love martial arts. As I said, I'm a big old dork for it, and I love training it, but I accept that there's a difference between it, and I think it's an important difference that needs to be done. And a lot of martial artists don't necessarily think about it that way, because you don't have to. You learn like, right, this is my jiu-jitsu, and this is how I apply my jiu-jitsu in a self-defense situation. Whereas what you should actually be talking about for self-defense, the term self-defense, actually, it probably isn't right. It's more personal safety is a good one to think about. The reason people say self-defense is more, it's a marketing thing. Everyone knows what self-defense is. If you say self-defense, everyone gets, I'm going to punch a bad guy in the nose and kick him in the balls and
That's
away
exactly
and
what I
go-
would do.
yeah.
But it'd be kicking the balls first. Yeah.
Yeah,
Even if it was
exactly.
a chick, I'd just be like, well, I'm going for it.
Go for it. Can't hurt. But the thing is, self-defense is actually a legal term, and that's one of the
Okay,
things that I
yes.
start with. So self-defense is just a justification for the use of violence, right, in the law.
Yeah.
That's all it means. It's just a defending using physical force.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that has to be considered. And part of what I talk about with my self-defense stuff is that it's a much more holistic approach. Yes, you do punching and kicking and things like that, but that's only one small part of it. Most of actually the self-defense stuff is mental or physiological or legal, things like this that you have to understand prior to being able to get to the point where you throw that punch. Because if you're in a position where you're having to use force, you're already in a pretty dire situation, and the more likely the further down the timeline that you go, where you get to the point where you're using force, means that you're more likely to have someone using force on you, and you're in a bad situation. And it's always it sounds like such a cliche thing with self-defense, but it's better not to be there in the first place, right?
Yeah.
And it's easy enough to say that, but the difference is most martial arts will pay lip service to that. You know, if you're in danger, run away.
Yeah.
Anyway, here's how you kick someone in the balls.
Yeah. So if it got to that point.
Yeah.
So yours is more, as you said, there's a timeline.
Yes.
Do you have a timeline that you teach your students to go, this is from A to Z?
Yeah, exactly.
Z is having to use or being in violence. So where is A? Like, can you tell us the timeline?
Yep, 100%. So that's one of the main things I come back to pretty much every time I talk about it, is understanding an generic overview. And there is obviously deviation from this, because this is the thing, it's one of those things where it's ever changing, but this is a pretty good model to understand it to start with, is this timeline.
Yep.
And it starts with, basically, there's 4 phases. So the first phase is preparation.
Yep.
The second phase is situational awareness.
Yeah.
The third phase would then be de-escalation, and then the fourth is combatives.
Okay.
And most martial arts focus on that fourth phase, the combatives.
Yeah.
Whereas if you think about it, that's 1/4 of this system. Whereas there's little bits of, so many different subjects that you could get into within each of the phases. People skip primarily most of the 3, and you should practice as much as you practice your combatives. You should be practicing the other skill sets as well. Yeah. And that's something that I try and focus on. So I always talk about the start of my classes, we always spend time doing some theory stuff. And although it's not the most exciting, that's why you have to balance it out a little bit. That's where you get the dick kicking and eye poking.
Yeah. Okay.
You've got to balance it out with certain bits. So we'll do a deep dive on a theory, maybe like an exercise to actually practice using those skills.
Yeah.
And then throughout the week as well, I'll have various little either like a thought just to think over, or like a goal for the day, or like a task, like a little adjustment that you can make to your life to try and practice these skills during the week. And then we'll meet up in our classes and we'll practice these harder skills more often.
Yeah.
But sorry, the timeline you asked me about, wandering off.
Yeah.
So the first phase is preparation, and that's basically what you do during the classes and your own training at home. And what that fundamentally comes down to is mental adjustments. It's making mental adjustments and understanding in preparation before anything occurs that's violence. So before you've been picked as a victim, before anything has actually happened, this is how prepared are you psychologically? How much do you understand about criminology? How much do you understand about physiology? How much do you understand about violence dynamics and predators? And how prepared are you to take damage? One of the big things is, if you've been, I know you've had your Muay Thai fight, so...
1-0, thank you.
Well,
Thanks
undefeated.
for bringing that up. Yep. And that's the end of the podcast.
But you understand the difference when you've got a bit of an adrenaline rush, being smacked in the face for the first time very, very hard, and someone really going for it is a shock, right? And if no one's experienced that before, because you got to remember, for self-defense, most people that come, they're not professional fighters, or they're not amateur fighters. They're not people looking to get into street brawls and things. They're probably not accustomed to being smashed in the face. And so that can be a shock. Yeah, that's right. You shouldn't be accustomed to that. It's weird
had a bad
that we're
childhood.
into it.
Yeah. Hey, I'm not so much into it. As I said, this is fat camp for me. Once I'm done, I'm out. Sorry. So, as you said, most people aren't used to getting smacked in the noggin.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's a big shock. So part of that is in the preparation phase, which is what you do in class, is slowly building up to actually, no, I do understand now what it's like. You start to slowly increase the pressure and you get used to, taking a few blows here and there. It's not like you're going around smashing each other in the face in class, but you build up to it.
Face smashing class.
Come in, I'll punch you in the nose. That'll be 10 pounds. Off you go.
There's probably some that are like that. What's that? The Israeli one? Krav Maga?
Krav Maga, yeah.
That looks a little bit fucking
face
smashy.
I knew a guy, bit off topic, but I knew a guy who went to a Krav Maga class, and he came to me and we were talking about it one day, and he was telling me that they do, so a pretty common practice is body conditioning. Like we were doing the other day, you get someone to put on gloves.
I was punching you.
You were doing it to me, you get someone to like put on gloves or whatever, and they'll kick your legs, punch your body, things like that. You get tough and you tense and used to taking hits. Quite sensible.
Yeah.
This motherfucker was at a class where they were doing head conditioning, and they were literally hands behind their back, punching each other in the head. And I'm like, that is insane. Yeah. That's not doing anything. You can't condition your brain.
No, you cannot. It's actually the opposite way. You heard it more.
And that's not all Krav Maga has to be said, but you do see things like that.
That's the direct quote from you today.
Tom you get flooded with Krav Maga instructors trying to fight me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, sorry. So the conditioning stuff, which you're doing in a right manner.
Yes. So it's just about building more so psychological preparedness for it, because what you, again, can probably testify to, it's not as bad as you think getting punched in the face. I mean, it's not fun. But you actually kind of settle into it and realize,
you're not getting knocked out. You know what I mean? Like there is a big difference between. Well, I mean, there's a big difference between someone doing it. Like when we're at training, we use 16-ounce gloves and shin pads and stuff 100%. Like that. So, I mean, if someone was just smacking me, or if I didn't have my guard up, I'd probably. Well, the guy in the class yesterday had a black eye because someone cracked him in the eyeball.
There was another girl in the class the other day. She was saying
she got
the same
elbowed
thing.
that one.
Yeah.
That was an accident. Not for I didn't. Sounds like I did it.
that's a guilty conscience.
On the next podcast. No, but so the conditioning and stuff like that. It's not as bad as
No, it's not. It's not crazy stuff, and it's stuff you have to build into.
I think it's the fear, like
that's
shock
100%.
of like closing your eyes and not cowering type thing.
100%. It's the fear. Yeah. Everyone does. I mean, I still catch myself doing it, and I'm like, coward.
Yeah. It's hard. It's really like you're not supposed to get hit.
Yeah. No, your body doesn't want that.
Yeah, it's just like the fight or flight thing. Like just
100%.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that we talk about. That's where it comes into the physiology, is the fight or flight, actually understanding what's going on with your body and why that's happening and things like that. Because again, another part of the preparedness is that if you are in that situation and suddenly your hands start to shake and you feel wobbly and your stomach starts going, it's going, oh God, I'm terrified.
Yes.
And that you get into this cycle. There's actually a really good self-defense expert called Tony Blauer, and he talks a lot. His big thing is about fear and the fear loop and things like that. I won't go into too much of it because that's his own paid course and things like that.
But free info, man.
But
let's go through the whole thing.
it's interesting stuff, because it's basically self-perpetuating, where you feel, oh my God, I'm shaking, and I'm worried now, and then you start to think, oh my God, I'm terrified, and then you build, your heart rate goes up and up and up and up, and you shut down, and that's not what you want in a self-defense situation, because you need your wits about you. Whereas in fact, the fight or flight response is there exactly for a self-defense situation where your life is in danger, and all the feelings that you're having is your body getting ready for that. right?
Yeah,
So
okay.
the shaking comes because your blood is being pulled away from the extremities to your vital organs, so you won't bleed as much if you're cut.
Which goes a long way in London when everyone's
Goes a
stabbing
long
each
way
other.
in London. Everyone loves a knife in London.
Yeah, like our evolution has gone to the right place in
Yeah.
London. Pour your blood to your vital organs.
Yeah, we went from getting hunted by like tigers and crazy predators to no need for that anymore.
Yeah.
Back to, oh, thank God we've got that.
Some chav on the tube.
Yeah.
Stab you. Yeah. So fight or flight, like, is there to actually...
That comes into it, physiology. Yeah. So it's understanding that, and kind of the more that you can actually rationalize in that stressful situation, the better.
Yep.
Because if you can think, not clearly, because there's always that cloud and those nerves, but the more clearly that you can think in that situation, the better, because you're gonna then remember the principles that we train and techniques and things that are in there. The techniques don't matter so much.
Yep.
This is again where the martial arts plugs back in to the system, because the combatives, I don't care what you do. Do what you like. So if it's effective, that's fine. If it works for you, if you've drilled it enough, and you've got those skills, then great, that's going to work for you. But the same thing is, if you're being punched for the first time in the face, and your mind shuts down and you can't think about doing anything, your body freezes, you don't understand what's going on. Well, where's your judo or your jiu-jitsu or whatever?
True,
then, right? You're still subject to it just as much as anyone else. Again, there's ways around it, and that's where it comes to how you train the combatives as well, with stress testing and things like that. But it's all about understanding that in the first instance before anything's even happened. So that's the kind of preparation phase.
Okay.
That's the phase one. Strap in, it's going to be long. I go off on too many tangents with those things.
Good.
Then comes situational awareness. So situational awareness, in my timeline, the first key is victim selection. So once you step out the house and you've been identified as a victim, whether that's before you've been approached or anything. Let's say you've got, we'll take the classic mugger on a street corner example. You're walking down a street, they're on the opposite side. They're going to be scanning around looking for victims. And then they're going to be identifying who they want to pick. And that's the moment that you are then technically in an encounter, even though you won't know it at that point, right? That's where it starts. I should say as well, victim selection and avoiding being a victim comes into the preparation phase as well, understanding things like that as well, which is, again, another important point to focus on before you get into this situation. But then situational awareness, most people have heard the term. It's a bit of a buzzword for self-defense. And it is pretty self-explanatory in terms of being aware of your surroundings. The thing is, this is another one that gets a lot of lip service with martial arts, where a lot of instructors and things will say, you've got to be aware of your surroundings at all times. Okay, I'm brand new, I'm Joe off the streets. I'm just a bit worried about my personal safety. I come to a self-defense class. Be aware of your surroundings. Great. How do I do that? What am I looking for? I don't know anything about this world. This isn't my thing. What am I doing? And that's where you have to then dial in again a bit more. And that's where we will talk about people's body language. We'll talk about proxemics in terms of distances and things. We'll talk about baseline behaviors for certain environments, and identifying baselines and things like that. Identifying exit points, choke points, things like this as well. And there's lots of drills that you can do for
choke points. Is that somewhere you get you don't? There's no way out.
Yeah, where you'd be isolated basically. Anywhere that you'd have to be funneled through. So let's say an easy example to think of is if you're in a park or a rec ground where it's all gated. It's just like a big field type thing. You can only go in or out via the 2 or 3 gates that might be on either side of the grounds, right? So you know that if I'm in here, I have to leave via one of these 2 gates. So that's a choke point. That's my only way out. I can climb the fence, and that's where you get into different escape options. But that's a choke point. So if I was a criminal and I'm waiting for someone, I know someone has to go through here. Well, maybe I'm going to spot my victim. I know exactly where they're going to go because they've got to leave this park at some point, right? So I'm going to plant myself by this choke point, this gate, and then I can confront them there because they have to come near me. And I'm no longer then making the approach to them, setting off alarm bells, making them uncomfortable, and I've got that element of surprise on my side. So being aware of that and kind of then seeing, oh, well, this guy's lurking near this choke point. That's making me a bit nervy, you know, and just being then in a heightened state of awareness from there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things you can do in terms of training and practicing these things. I would do things like during the week or at seminars and stuff, I'd send like a little map. Like I'd download just a floor plan of like a restaurant or something like that.
Yep.
And I'd say, go nuts, here's a marker pen, you know. Tell me where are you going to sit in this restaurant? Where's your choke points? Where's nearest weapon, nearest exit? You know, what's whatever.
Yeah.
And people go through that, and then we cross-reference and talk about things like that. And again, that's a super easy activity that you can do just to get you thinking the right way. Because that's the main thing with situational awareness is thinking about it.
Yeah.
And there's a really good what's the guy's name? Cooper's color codes is a really famous one that a lot of people talk about in self-defense, where there's different levels of awareness that you have based on the situation.
Yeah, okay.
And it's a really good model for people to understand, where you basically have white is the lowest.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you're completely unaware of everything, you know, head down, looking at your phone, oblivious to the world around you. Then you have yellow, which is alert and aware of what's going on around you. But you're not like panicked. Your heart rate, and these all sync up with heart rates. I can't remember exactly where he puts them on his system. But relaxed heart rate, just like we would be now talking, but
I'm
aware
terrified,
of what's going
on. All this violence.
Then you have orange, which is a much a heightened awareness, where you might be in like an argument. Think of like an argument, that kind of level of heart rate, where you're not necessarily, you know, absolutely shitting yourself and about to have a fight, but you're very like, whew. Then I think it's red from memory is the next one up, which is like, whoa, real danger, like I'm panicking, I'm like fighting for my life here. And then you have black, which is the one you never want to be in, where you've overshot it and your heart rate's way up into like anywhere past 175 beats per minute is where your adrenaline starts to kind of take over, and your body starts to then lose abilities that it's gained. So fight or flight has this real premium window of where it's going to be valuable. And then as it starts to climb, and again, it's individual, but 175 generally and upwards is where it starts to deviate. And that's where you start to kind of lose control of your motor patterns and start to, you know, shit yourself and stuff, which isn't fun for anyone. Yeah. And so Cooper's color codes, it basically says you want to be situation yellow at all time. So that's the perfect citizen, aware of what's around and things. And again, that's little bits we talk about. You get the classic advice like, you know, don't stare at your phone and things like that, but you've got to actually think about, well, how am I going to do this? Because the reality of it is I want to be out and about and I want to use my phone. Okay, well, now you need to be aware enough of when can I stop and when can I take my phone out safely and, you know, send a message or whatever. Or, you know, when can I listen to my headphones out in public versus when can't I? And that comes down to, again, understanding baselines of environments and situational awareness in general. Comes back in. So that's what we focus on there. The third phase then is de-escalation, and that's where you've actually then engaged with your aggressor. Again, whatever situation, we'll stick with the mugger scenario, let's say, where the person's now come up for you and you're now interacting with them. However aggressive that might be, it might be quite calm, it might be aggressive. It depends again on the predator type that you're dealing with, and again, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. But the idea is now you're actually in communication with this person. It's not so easy to just, you know, sprint away. Maybe you can.
So would that be red on the color scale?
No. That would be
yellow?
orange.
Orange. Sorry, skipped a step. But that basically is where you come and you use soft skills. So that's where we practice dealing with aggression. And we'll practice de-escalating it with various tools. And again, part of going back to preparation, understanding what types of criminals that you're dealing with and what types of violence and kind of general criminology type bits is then where you work out actually this soft skill might be more appropriate than others. So, for example, if I'm dealing with a mugger, negotiation or even surrender is perfectly valid, because I'm going to be fine. He wants my phone, fine. I'm not happy about it, but
take my phone, I'm fine. And that's the important thing.
Yeah.
Whereas if you then go with, let's say, sexual assault, you don't want to surrender, because then you are giving that predator what they want, right? And so that's where you have to understand the difference in predators,
Yes.
And what they want.
Yeah.
And again, that comes into various different things in how you employ skills. But basically, we'd look at dealing with aggression, using aggression. Assertiveness is a completely valid social skill to use.
Yeah.
For some scenarios. That's enough to get people to back down. And then again, you have negotiation, empathy. Empathy is a weird one, but you can humanize yourself basically with empathy. And in a lot of social violence scenarios, that's what might be needed. So you basically have social violence and you have predatory violence.
Yeah.
So social violence is more towards the person or group of individuals that are threatening you. It's more about them and how they are perceived to their group or to people in front of them. It's not necessarily about you.
Wanting to look tough in front of your friends.
And there's typically 4 types of social violence. And again, how you deal with it varies on which type you're dealing with. Quite easy to identify. But one of the big takeaways for social violence is not letting yourself be othered. Because psychologically, as humans, we're very tribal, right? Yeah. Everyone's got a football team, or they get behind their country or whatever. Everyone has their core group. And so if you are othered from their perceived core group, you are easier for them to inflict violence to, right? They're more willing to do it because you're an outsider, you're different. We don't like you because of this.
Yeah, you mean nothing to us.
Exactly. Whereas if you're using empathy as a tool, you can relate to them a little bit more, and it just makes it that bit harder to separate you. Yeah. And again, it's because you're not necessarily going to have a big long conversation. Sometimes this de-escalation stage can be super fast. Like,
I love
someone's just in your face.
I love violence. They're like, oh shit, he's one of us. Yeah. Then you punch some random person. You're like, I love it.
Yeah. But sometimes it's a case of make something up that like just humanizes you. It's like
I shit myself.
I'm just trying to think of a good example off the top of my head, because there's one actually. Tony Blau, the guy I was talking about that had the other system, the spear system. He gave an example before which I liked, where these guys were harassing this girl outside of a shop, and her boyfriend came out of the shop, and they're getting it all in his face. He's been quite aggressive as well, and he basically said something along the line, I can't remember the exact story, but something along the lines of, how would you feel if this was your sister or your girlfriend or whatever it was from memory. And it was just enough where it was like, okay, well, fuck you, man, and left, rather than punched him in the face and left. And sometimes that's enough. That's all you want. I don't care if you look the tough man, or if not, if you look like a baby. Who cares? So long as you're not getting beat up.
That would be the hard thing to think on your feet, to like, for words to form out of your mouth correctly and coherently.
And that again just comes down to pressure testing. Like, we'll do that quite a lot, where we will get each other to scream in each other's faces and be that aggressor, knowing that there's no violence, right? We're like, no, I don't want you to clock this person, but I want you to really invade their personal space, shout at them, swear at them, get used to that. And all they're doing is constantly, hey man, look, I'm sorry, I don't want any problems, coming up with whatever lines that they want to use. And that helps get used to dealing with aggression right in your face.
Because it doesn't happen much. Like, even that, like,
it's a shock.
I can't remember. Sorry, I'm 32 and I can't remember many times, and I'm not overly big or scary, but then there hasn't been many times in my life where there's been someone screaming in my face. Yeah,
that's the thing. We live in a very civilized society now, and the thing is, when you talk about self-defense and violence in general, it's quite taboo, right? And we're not exposed to it that much. You get movies and stuff, but that does more harm than good. Because it's all fake
when
shit.
Someone pulls out a gun, I
it's
spin,
like,
grab their wrist, snap it, turn the gun on them. It's like, man, you're on a jail, mate. Or,
No, you get a shot.
Immediately. You move their arm into your head. Yeah.
So that's the thing with that. And again, the de-escalation is just basically understanding what tools you need and using those.
Yeah.
And then it's the combatives.
Yes.
And so that's if all else has failed.
So we're at number 4 now.
Then you go number 4. Yeah.
Yep.
And there's basically 2 ways that the combatives phase would start. 1, you instigate it, and 2, they instigate it.
Yep.
The ideal for a self-defense situation would be for you to instigate it because you're earlier in this timeline, right?
Okay.
So if you realize my de-escalation is failing, this is going to be violence, I feel justified, and because I've already done my preparation, I know the law surrounding self-defense, I know what I can do, and I know that I'm safe in doing it. I'm going to hit first, I'm going to hit fucking hard, and I'm going to make sure that this isn't going to be a situation, and I'm going to create myself an opportunity to leave. So that's the ideal. The ideal, you hit them, one shot, bam, they're unconscious, you leave, you're safe, right?
Or if they're not unconscious, you run?
Depends. Again, this is where it really shoots off into a million different directions because who knows what happens. Yeah. In some situations, you might be justified in continuing to follow up. Some situations, you might leave. Yeah. So if you're, relatively fit, and you've hit this person, they've gone down, you're on your own, you can run confidently, they're not going to chase you, great. But now let's say you're a 70-year-old woman and you've got your grandkid with you, right?
Let me visualize it.
Put yourself there.
Okay,
Now, how are you going to do that? You might be okay to get away.
Granny's packing.
Yeah. Right? That's the United States answer most of the time.
Yeah.
But
it is hard because it is like that is another variable of age and
100%,
and like how healthy you are. You might be 20, but you might have an illness or whatever it might be. Yeah, you might be meek and weak and whatever else.
Yeah, you might be against this fucking shredded, jacked guy, and you're like, this guy's gonna outrun me.
True.
I can run now, but he's gonna catch me in 10 seconds, and it's gonna get worse.
Is there any? I know you might be getting to this, and I might be jumping the gun, but is there any part of it, maybe in the preparation for social awareness and stuff like that, to go we're in public, I'm gonna get belted, I can't run, existing injury or something like that, I should just yell, to get awareness. Yeah,
that again is a strategy for normally resource predators. Yeah. And again, it depends on what type of violence you're dealing with, but drawing attention to absolutely valid strategy.
Yeah, because people are and it's another thing. I was only thinking this the other day because someone was fucking screaming around here. And I had my headphones in and I was like, what the fuck's going on? And then it turned out that some chick was just getting railed by her partner. So I was like, all right, put the self-defense, I don't have to do anything besides listen and critique. But that sort of sounds, and I know that's a very strange one, but my brain went from normal to be what the fuck's that?
100%.
Certain sounds that as humans we talk, laughter, talking, maybe, but squealing, screaming and stuff, our attention is spider senses. What the fuck was that? You're automatically why did that person scream? Is there a fucking tsunami coming? Is there this? It's, so I feel probably not a bad tactic if there are people around to hear.
More so than that, though, it doesn't actually matter about the people around.
Yeah.
So if there are people around that react, great. But the thing is, I'm a big proponent for it's self-defense. So that is all you're relying on is yourself, right? Yeah. I don't care. If there is a public around and there's people that can come and help, great.
Yeah.
But you need to be prepared not to have that. Yeah. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't still kick up noise in the right scenario, right? Yeah. Because one of my favorite things to talk about with any kind of bad guy, as it were,
or woman,
they
can be
21st century.
They can be scum as well.
You're right. But there's two things that a predator doesn't want, and that's to be hurt and it's to be caught.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you are drawing loads of attention and you're fighting back real hard, then that might be enough to put them off. And that's great. That's all you need. And that's the idea of like rape whistles and rape alarms and things like that, is they don't actually necessarily get people coming running. Sometimes they will, but it puts the fear into the attacker, like, oh shit, like people are going to hear that, people are going to be coming, not worth it, I'm going to go for an easier target. And that's part of what, again, comes into preparation, like you say, is making yourself a harder target, making it so that, if you remember right at the start of the timeline, I said the very first thing after preparation is victim selection. If you stop yourself being selected as a victim in the first place, none of that matters. And that's the big thing with the timeline, is as you go further down it, you only need those skills if the ones before have failed. So if you've done all your preparation and you never get selected as a victim, great. That's the end of the timeline for you. No bother. And the further down that timeline you get, the more danger you're in and the more risk of being hurt you are. So I have a big green arrow running at the top. Multicolored arrow. It goes from green to red as it goes. And that's because it gets progressively worse. So if you get to the combatives phase, the reality of violence is you're probably going to take some damage. You're probably going to get hit. You're probably going to get grabbed or manhandled in some way. And the longer that fight goes on, the worse it is likely to be. Which is why I say that preemptive strike is the best form of defense, because if it has to be violent, you want to go first. Because you give yourself that opportunity to end it sooner. If they go first, then you're reacting now. And you have to train that as well. But you still want to get in and you want to blitz through that, and you want that to be as fast as you can, because your body hits physiological exhaustion pretty quickly once you've had that adrenaline dump, right? And you'll still have the adrenaline coursing through your veins and things like that, but that maximum time is only something like 8 to 10 seconds on average. So that is your prime time when you're pumped and you're going, go, right? After that, it then starts to deteriorate. That's not to mean suddenly you can't move and can't do anything, but you're going to have less energy. You're not going to have all those same attributes that you gained from the fight or flight response and that adrenal dump.
So is that what flight is adrenaline?
Essentially, it's a whole cocktail of different hormones. But that's basically what it is. The fight or flight response basically prepares your body for fight or flight. And there's actually, again, weird, odd tangent to fly off on.
That's fine.
There's actually really 4 responses for fight or flight. Fight or flight's the generally used term. But you've got fight, flight, freeze, or posture. And this is generally how people react. So fight, obviously, you get ready to fight and you fucking go for it. Flight, you run away. Freeze is freezing, and that's the most common one. In terms of like, you get punched in the face, you get this dump, and suddenly you can't move, you don't know what to do. Your brain's like going a million miles an hour, but you can't decide anything. Your body won't do anything that you want it to, and that's a really hard hurdle to overcome. And again, that's something that you have to practice doing. And then posture is the last one, where some people, when they get this adrenaline response, they make themselves really big, and they'll get in people's faces and they'll start shouting and swearing, and they'll posture up. Even though it's probably a bluff rather than anything. The thing is, it tends to lead, those last two tend to lead into fight or flight afterwards anyway. Freeze is the worst one.
Because you're standing.
You're not doing anything.
You're fucking just a target, aren't you? And that's the big thing, is overcoming freezes, and that's a whole nother thing to work on. So they're the 4.
Those are the 4. You were saying about what fight flight was. Sorry, I keep wandering off.
Well, so it was more just my adrenaline dump, because I watch a fair bit of UFC and stuff like that. They always talk about adrenaline dumps for fighters and stuff like that.
100%.
Which is very interesting, because that is a professional in their element who has been training for months and months and months. So I assume it must be a little bit different in the way of, because they know they're going to get hit. They've been hit before, but the adrenaline dump itself is just essentially your body just fucking makes too much, and then
no. So what it basically is, like you say, the difference with fighting, is, you know that it's coming,
Yeah.
right? And you're prepared. You'll still get that adrenaline dump, but it's a bit more of a slow burner and you know it's there. And a lot of professional athletes actually utilize it quite well. Like they're very calm, and there are a lot of techniques, again, that you practice to keep your sympathetic nervous system in check. So sympathetic nervous system is responsible for the fight or flight response, and then you have its opposite, the parasympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for rest and digest. So you can use techniques, which we practice as well, to keep that level calm. The difference comes from in self-defense if it's a sudden ambush.
Okay.
That's where most likely you get the freeze, because suddenly your body goes from 0 to 100.
Yeah, okay.
Which is why it's so important to have that situational awareness, that de-escalation, because you're giving yourself as much information and time as possible, because this whole time you'll be getting micro doses of adrenaline. Yeah. And everything that you do, anytime you do a bit of exercise, your body releases adrenaline.
Yeah.
Anytime your body is under any kind of stress, it's releasing adrenaline. It's ticking into that fight or flight response, that sympathetic nervous system, right?
Yeah.
So your body is adept at handling it. And that's why athletes and UFC fighters are more used to that. They understand that as well. And they kind of slow burn it over a little bit more.
Yeah.
Again, it's just practice, basically, and familiarity with it.
Yeah.
Whereas if you are caught by surprise and you haven't done any situational awareness, you haven't de-escalated anything, and suddenly this thing is just happening to you and you're experiencing violence for the first time, your body is going to freak the fuck out.
Yeah.
And it gives you that same adrenal dump, but you don't know how to handle it. You don't know what's going on. You've not experienced it to those levels. Mm-hmm. And it's mainly actually your heart rate that gives you the issue. Because like I say, your heart rate shoots. So let's say your resting heart rate is, I don't know, 90 odd beats per minute, something like that. And then suddenly this thing happens to you. You get this adrenal response. Suddenly you're shaking. Your heart rate shoots up and it's near 200 beats per minute. Your body's going to start to shut down. And that's the difference. Being able to manage that and manage your heart rate. Yeah. So parasympathetic, diaphragmatic breathing, is a good way of practicing controlling your heart rate in particular and activating the parasympathetic nervous system to combat that. And it's used universally. Like, so we talked about ice baths yesterday, right?
Yeah.
That's what people use. So typically for ice baths and things, what you're trying to do is relax. So when you get in, your body is stressed and it's your sympathetic nervous system activates, and that's why you start to shake and your heart rate starts going up. The way that you stay in there for a longer time is to breathe diaphragmatically, so through like belly breathing, which activates your parasympathetic nervous system. The military use the same thing, combat breathing, where you're breathing in nasally and deep into your diaphragm for 4 or 5, it depends, beats, holding it for 4 or 5 beats, let it out 4 or 5 beats. A couple of those and you'll be feeling pretty good pretty fast, and it relaxes the body. It's the same thing that fighters do between rounds as well. In their corners, their cornermen come out. What do they tell you to do? Breathe. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's all about getting that, controlling the heart rate, controlling your body's responses. It's part of why, again, it's such an interesting art as well, martial arts. Yeah. It's having that control over yourself.
It's a lot to self-defense. Like, as you said, I suppose the main thing too that I've taken away from this would definitely be, like, number one, preparation to not be the victim.
100%.
Yeah.
That's the big thing. And it doesn't matter what kind of martial artist you are. You've been doing martial art for years and years and years. If you haven't thought about this stuff and you don't understand this stuff, take a little bit of time to learn it and you'll make yourself infinitely better. You might be, Jean-Claude Van Damme and you think you can kick the shit out of anyone. But
I wouldn't say that because he actually listens.
I'm sure he could kick the shit out of me.
Yeah, I'd say so. And he's probably in his 60s now, I guess. But you are correct. Like, number one, the preparation, like, that didn't even cross my mind. It was literally, it was for, like, you're, like, combative, that my mind automatically is, the situation is this. I'm walking down the street, someone comes up to me, they want my phone. That's the only scenario in my head.
Yeah, that's what most
But
people
it's
think of.
before all that actually makes the sense to be like, oh, fuck, yeah. I probably shouldn't have been walking through a shitty neighborhood with my phone out at night, seeing a group of, younger people or whatever the fuck who it was standing around, milling around, drinking, smashing bottles, being fuckwits, being loud, and then thinking that I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to play fucking Angry Birds, as I'm walking down the street. But it's like, no, know your surroundings, no bad things can happen, but if it does, there is the steps.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's small micro adjustments, and that's the thing. With self-defense, is never going to be a huge industry like martial arts can be.
Yes, yeah.
Because it's boring. There's no magic to it, right? It's just you make a few little lifestyle adjustments and mental adjustments that doesn't even have to affect your day-to-day living, really. It's just think about a few things now and then.
Yeah.
And you will be able to avoid 99% of those encounters. If you think you can get through all three of those stages, and you're actively trying, you're aware of what's going on, and you know these strategies, and you're trying all of these things, and you still get to violence, you've done something quite wrong, or this person really doesn't like you.
Yeah, that
you've really upset someone.
Yeah, I suppose that is the issue. Again, with people being involved, there is anomalies, erratic behavior.
Yes.
You never know what's...
And that's the
people
thing.
Just don't give a fuck. You're screaming and this and oh fuck,
Yeah, so a lot of behavior can be predicted when it comes to violence, which is why I categorize it and I teach people about the types of predators and types of violence and things like that, because it's important to understand. But there are the odd thing that just goes off the rail, right? And that's why, again, it's not worth learning okay, if A happens, I do B. And if B doesn't work, then I do C, D, E, whatever, right? Yeah. It can work for you sometimes, but the easiest thing, because under all that stress, everything goes out your head, right?
Yeah.
The easiest thing to do is remember principles. So everything I teach is principle-led.
Yeah.
And whether that's in situational awareness or preparation or whatever, there's just a simple principle that if you remember that, you can figure your own way through things.
Yeah.
And especially if you're accustomed to being uncomfortable and being in these situations, and you remember just this, one little line, then, I can figure my way through this. And I've done, a little bit of striking, and I've done a little bit of this and that in class. So now I remember how to do this and how to do that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're right, if this specific scenario happens, then do this.
Yeah.
If this specific scenario happens, then you do this totally different thing. And if this happened, it's too much. Yeah. People can't remember that shit and don't want to remember that shit.
Yeah, it's and as you said, it can be such little things, it may lead to something, if you went from B but you perceived it as, you know what I mean? It wasn't
100%.
Yeah,
I can't tell you what's going to happen. No one knows what's going to happen. Any number of things could change, and there's an infinitely different amount of things that happen based on all these different circumstances. I'm not going to be there holding your hand. So the best thing to do is just remember, the few key bits, and again, the avoidance in general is the main bit. But if you get to that thing, then you've just got to remember these principles and have the right idea about you, and be prepared to do whatever you've got to do for that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, as you said, there are steps, and as long as you are aware that things could happen and have essentially a contingency plan for those things, you're going to go or be, I think, in a better situation.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Well, I think you've pretty much answered all my questions just naturally. So, obviously, you're traveling for the next couple of months here and there. Will you want to, I know you want to get back into the self-defense classes and stuff like that once you're back home. So if anyone is listening from London, which there seems to be random people, I don't know.
You never know.
Seem to listen. Where would people find you?
I guess, to be honest, the best thing to do is just Instagram.
Yep.
Because from there, and I try and run the social medias as like little bits anyway. So I'll take a principle or an idea or a technique or whatever, and I'll write a little blurb about it or do a little activity and things.
Yep.
And so there's a lot of those mental things that you can do anyway, regardless. I have been pretty terrible at doing any of that since I've packed it in though.
Yeah.
But I'll get back on it.
But there's still information and stuff on there.
Yeah.
So
and then once I'm back up and running, I'll see kind of what I do with it and
Yeah.
where I am and stuff.
What is your Instagram handle?
It's just at Red Panda Self Defense.
Red Panda Self Defense.
Terrible name, I know.
No, and I was going to say your full name again, but I got it right once, so I'm just going to go with Tom.
Yeah.
And no, thank you so much for coming on. I've actually
appreciate
learned quite a bit, and if anyone else is out there from any country, obviously if they want to look at your stuff online and or go and do a self-defense class to learn the essentially the principles, I hope it's similar to what yours are. Obviously people can teach whatever they want, but
Yeah, that's the thing. It's super loose and open to interpretation. Is the thing. Like, I'm not telling you one right way to do things. I mean, I'm not going to claim to be better than anyone. I'm
Jean-Claude Van Damme, you heard
apart
it
from
here.
him. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for coming on, mate. And good luck with your fight tomorrow night.
God, yeah, thanks.
Tom is actually fighting a gentleman that is 17 kilos heavier than him. So
Yeah, that should be fun.
it was a strategic plan to get the podcast done this week. But he shall win. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of whatever number podcast this is. I will see you guys next week. Thank you. Bye.